He didn't know that the little girl whose smile he brought back was the daughter of the man his wife accidentally killed. Before we start the story, leave a comment with the city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. The night had swallowed the city whole, but inside the Crescent Arts Academy, everything was still blindingly bright. It was one of those posh, downtown dance studios you see in big cities. New York, Toronto, maybe even Kingston. All polished wood floors and high, arched windows designed to make the place look airy and full of light. But now, it was empty, and the only man walking its halls was Ethan. Ethan wasn't there for the glamour. He was there for the grease, the smudges, and the dirt left behind by 100 pairs of dancing feet. He was a cleaner, working the late shift. And more importantly, he was a single dad. He moved through the studio like a shadow, pushing his industrial cleaning trolley, which had a wobbly wheel that squeaked just enough to annoy him. Ethan himself wasn't loud. His movements were steady, almost rhythmic, as if the job itself had turned into a slow, lonely dance. He was a tall man, maybe mid-30s, with hands that were rough from scrubbing but still looked like they knew how to hold something delicate. He wore a faded gray t-shirt and jeans that had seen better days, the uniform of a man who worked hard so his son didn't have to. His son was Leo, just 6 years old, with eyes that sparkled like the sequins on the costumes. Ethan was currently sweeping up from the practice rooms. As Ethan worked, he didn't listen to music. He sang. It wasn't a loud song, just a low, gravelly hum. A lullaby for Leo, the same one he sang every night to tuck him in. It was a comfort, a small piece of home he carried with him into the cavernous, quiet halls of the academy. His body ached. Not just a little tiredness, but the deep, bone-weary ache that comes from piecing together 2 minimum-wage jobs just to keep the rent paid and the pantry stocked. Every push of the heavy mop felt like pushing a small boulder uphill. He knew this life wasn't what he'd dreamed of. Once upon a time, Ethan's feet knew a different rhythm. He hadn't always pushed a mop like a burden. He used to push it like a waltz partner. Dance. That had been his great, buried passion. He'd been good, too, with a natural grace that didn't match his tough exterior. But life, as it so often does, had served up a curveball named responsibility, and the dream of the spotlight had been quietly traded for the necessity of the late shift. It was a common story, the one where you give up the music in your soul so you can provide the stability your child needs. Ethan pushed the mop into the main studio space. It was enormous, surrounded by mirrors that reflected the fluorescent glow, making the room seem endless. It was here, in the cold glass of the far window, that he saw her. The girl. She was sitting absolutely still, outside the studio but close to the glass, positioned perfectly to watch where the dancers usually practiced their leaps and turns. Her name was Maya, and she couldn't have been older than 10. Her hair was a dark, tight braid that fell over her shoulder, and she had on a puffy winter coat, even though it wasn't bitterly cold yet. But what caught Ethan's eye wasn't the coat or the braid. It was the wheelchair. It was a sleek, modern, lightweight chair, but it was fixed in place, its wheels locked. She wasn't moving, and it was the look in her eyes that hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. They were wide and dark, glued to the empty reflection in the studio glass. They didn't reflect joy or childish curiosity. They were glistening, yes, but it was the quiet, sharp sheen of longing. It was the look of someone watching a party they couldn't attend, or hearing a song they couldn't sing along to. Ethan stopped pushing his mop. The squeak of the wobbly wheel died, and the only sound was the distant hum of the ventilation system. He stood there for a long moment, a ghost of his own lost dream echoing in the palpable sadness radiating from the small figure in the wheelchair. He knew that look. It was the look of being close enough to touch something beautiful, yet separated by a pane of glass or, in his own case, a lifetime of debt and exhaustion. He understood the feeling of wanting to move, to glide, to be part of the flow, while being completely stuck. He slowly walked toward the window, dragging his tired feet on the polished floor. Maya still hadn't noticed him. She was lost in the imaginary ballet taking place in her head. When he finally reached the glass, he crouched down a little, just enough to be closer to her level. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just offered her a smile. It wasn't a big, showy grin. It was small, warm, and a little worn around the edges. The kind of smile only those who have truly known hardship and still choose kindness can give. It held no pity, only recognition. It said, "I see you. I know what you're wishing for, and it's okay to want it." Maya's head snapped up. She looked startled, perhaps expecting to see a janitor shooing her away from the expensive property. Instead, she saw Ethan's face, tired, kind, and focused entirely on her. She hesitated, her small hands resting on the wheels of her chair, before a tiny, tentative smile finally pulled at the corner of her mouth, like a shy flower blooming after a long frost. "Hi," Ethan said softly. His voice was low, and he spoke through the window, the glass making his voice sound muffled, yet somehow clearer than any shout. "Hi," Maya whispered back. "Nice view you've got there," he continued, glancing back at the mirrored room. "You come here often?" "Sometimes," she replied, her eyes dropping to her lap. "When the classes finish. I like to watch them practice." Ethan nodded, not pressing her for more. He knew what she meant. Watching was the next best thing to doing. It was a secret ritual, seeking out the beautiful thing you couldn't have, just to feel its energy. He stood up slowly, the muscles in his legs protesting the movement. He wasn't going to leave the moment on a simple greeting. He looked back at the vast, shining floor of the studio, the stage of his own forgotten dreams, and then back at the little girl whose face was alight with a flicker of hope. He thought of Leo, and how the simplest gesture of care made his son feel loved, even when money was tight. Ethan tapped lightly on the glass with his knuckles, indicating the empty space in the room. "Look," he said, holding her gaze. "The floor is all clean now. It's ready." Maya tilted her head, confused. "Ready for what?" Ethan took a few steps back from the window, pulling his phone from his pocket. He quickly scrolled through his playlist and hit play on a gentle, old-school R&B track, something with a slow, soulful rhythm, like a classic wedding song. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled the empty studio. He didn't make a big show of it. He didn't twirl or leap. He just placed his hand on the handle of his mop, the same mop he'd been pushing all night, and began to move. Slowly, he let the rhythm fill the ache in his muscles, stepping back into the dancer he used to be. The mop became his partner, his feet gliding in a simple, gentle box step. He moved with a quiet, easy grace, his eyes closed for a moment, letting the music tell the story his life had paused. It was only a few seconds of movement, a single, solitary dance in the empty hall, but it was enough. He opened his eyes and looked at Maya. Her longing was gone. Her face was illuminated by the reflected light of the mirror and the pure, unexpected joy of the moment. She wasn't watching an empty floor anymore. She was watching someone remember how to move. And as he smiled at her, a full, genuine, tired but happy smile this time, he saw Maya lift her arms and gently, just barely, sway her body in time with the slow music, joining his secret dance from behind the glass. The connection was immediate, warm, and powerful. In that moment, the cleaner and the girl in the wheelchair were not defined by their struggles, but by a shared, perfect rhythm. Ethan felt the tightness in his chest ease. He felt like he hadn't just cleaned a floor, he had dusted off a piece of his own soul. It was a beautiful, heartwarming start to a very long night. The little girl's name was Lila, and the memory of the cleaner's gentle waltz stayed with her long after the studio lights went out. The night before, when he'd danced with his mop and smiled at her through the glass, it felt like someone had peeled back a sliver of the heavy, dark curtain that had been drawn over her life. Lila was 10, and for the last year, life had become a series of flat surfaces. The glossy wood of her expensive desk, the polished granite of the kitchen counter, and the cool metal of her wheelchair. It was a car accident that had stolen the movement from her legs and, worse, the spring from her soul. Before, Lila had been all motion and noise, dreaming of being a dancer, a ballerina or maybe a hip-hop artist, just anything that involved her feet flying free. Now, her afternoons were spent in the same spot, just outside the main studio of the Crescent Arts Academy. She wasn't allowed inside, not because of the wheelchair, but because the sight of all that effortless motion hurt too much. So she watched. She watched the other kids move like water, jumping and spinning, doing the very thing her body refused to do. Lila's world, outside of that aching window, was comfortable, maybe too comfortable. Her mother, Amelia, made sure of that. Amelia was a force of nature, a businesswoman who had built her own empire in commercial real estate. She was successful in every way the world measured success. Expensive clothes, houses in 3 different countries, and a focus that could cut through steel. Amelia's life was about fixing things and solving problems. When Lila was hurt, Amelia brought in the best specialists, the most intensive physical therapists, and the highest-paid private tutors money could buy. She tried to fill the emotional void with efficiency and expense. But Amelia's heart had never quite figured out how to slow down long enough to connect with her daughter's pain. She saw Lila's sadness as another problem to be managed, a gap that needed filling. "Did you finish your algebra, Lila?" Amelia would ask, her voice always carrying the slight, strained tone of someone multitasking even when she was looking right at you. "The new tutor, Mr. Davies, says you're falling behind." Lila wanted to scream, "I don't care about algebra. I care that I can't dance." But she never did. She just nodded, feeling the distance grow wider between her and the woman who should have been her anchor. Amelia provided the most luxurious cage imaginable, but it was a cage nonetheless. She was emotionally distant, giving everything but the one thing Lila truly needed. A mother who saw the girl, not the condition. One evening, Amelia was running late for a big international video call. She dropped Lila off at the academy, telling the security guard she'd be back in an hour. "Stay right here, sweetie. Don't wander," Amelia instructed, her fingers already flying across her tablet screen. She gave Lila a quick, functional kiss on the forehead, the kind of kiss you give a piece of luggage you're checking at the airport. Lila didn't wander. She wheeled herself straight to her spot by the large studio window. The night was cold, and the studio was quiet. She was waiting for the movement, the music, the warmth she'd found the night before. She was waiting for the cleaner. And sure enough, around 8 o'clock, the industrial trolley with the squeaky wheel rolled into the hallway. Ethan appeared, looking exactly as he had the day before. Tired, kind, and humming that quiet, soulful tune that Lila recognized as a lullaby. He saw her right away. He didn't look surprised or curious. He looked like he expected her to be there. He paused his work and walked over to the glass, holding his mop loosely. This time, Lila spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you dance when you were little?" Ethan leaned in closer to the glass. "I did. When I was your age, I used to drive my mother crazy dancing in the kitchen." He chuckled, a sound that was surprisingly genuine. "I was going to be a star, a big, famous dancer." "What happened?" Lila asked, her eyes searching his face. He paused, glancing at the mop in his hands. He didn't lie or tell a long story. He kept it simple, real. Life happened. Sometimes you have to take a detour to look after the people you love. But the music never leaves you. Lila looked down at her lap, at her useless legs draped in soft corduroy. "It's not the same. It's not the same just listening. You have to be able to do it." Her voice cracked with the sadness she usually kept hidden even from her mother. Ethan crouched down again, resting his arm on his knee. His eyes were steady and serious, holding her gaze. He didn't offer empty pity or cliché phrases about never giving up. He offered a powerful truth. "Music doesn't ask you to stand," he said, his voice gentle and low, cutting through the silence of the large hall. "It just asks you to listen." He let the words hang there, not pressing her to respond. He wasn't telling her to be strong. He was telling her to redefine what strength meant. The power of that simple statement settled over Lila like a warm blanket. In her life, everyone, Amelia, the doctors, the therapists, had focused on what her legs couldn't do. They pushed her to stand, to walk, to fix the broken parts. But Ethan, the kind-eyed cleaner, was the first person who told her she didn't need to stand to participate in the joy of the world. She didn't have to be a dancer. She just had to be a listener. He stood up, gave her a respectful nod, and went back to cleaning. He didn't start dancing this time, but he turned his music back on. A beautiful, complicated jazz piece this time, full of deep brass and a walking bass line. Lila closed her eyes. She leaned her head back against the cold steel of her chair, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt the music. She listened to the brass notes climb and fall, and she imagined the sound swirling around her head, touching her skin, vibrating through the metal of her chair. She focused so hard on the melody that she could feel a small, internal movement, a beat of rhythm in her chest that was separate from the ache in her legs. It was just a tiny feeling, a spark, but it was the first time since the accident that Lila felt like her soul had been reached. She didn't have to watch the dance anymore. She could hear it. And in that moment of finding a new rhythm, the curtain over her life fluttered, allowing the smallest sliver of light to shine through. The despair hadn't vanished, but the hope, small and resilient, had finally been invited in. The smell of disinfectant and stale coffee clung to Ethan even after the long drive home. His apartment was small, situated above a friendly little bakery in a quiet, older neighborhood. It wasn't the gleaming, polished hall of the Crescent Arts Academy, but it was home. It was warm, it was safe, and most importantly, it held his son. Leo was 6, and his whole world was made of primary colors and unshakable trust. Ethan walked straight to the back bedroom where a small, sturdy bed waited. He found Leo, already dressed in his dinosaur pajamas, trying valiantly to keep his eyes open while reading a battered comic book. "Well, look who's still up," Ethan murmured, his voice softening instantly from the tired, working man's rasp to the gentle tone of a devoted father. Leo's face lit up, a brilliant, pure light that chased away the shadows of Ethan's exhaustion. "Dad, I was waiting for you," the boy mumbled, letting the comics slide to the floor. Ethan bent down, his knees cracking a little, to pick up the book. He moved the comic aside and sat on the edge of the bed. This was the ritual, a final hug, a final story, a final check that all the monsters under the bed were accounted for and locked out. This quiet moment was the fuel that kept Ethan going through all those graveyard shifts. As he smoothed the sheets over Leo's small body, Ethan looked around the room. It wasn't fancy. The furniture was second-hand, the rug was worn thin, and the window overlooked a brick wall. But Ethan had filled it with his own love, little drawings taped to the walls, a favorite toy truck parked safely on the nightstand, and the constant sound of his humming. He ran a weary hand through Leo's hair. "Time to close those eyes, buddy." Leo snuggled down, but his small hand grabbed Ethan's thumb. "Dad," he whispered, "are we going to get that house with the big yard soon? The one where I can have a dog?" The question was simple, innocent, and hit Ethan with the force of a wrecking ball. He thought of the mountains of bills, the repairs needed for the cleaning van, and the crushing reality of his low wages. But he didn't hesitate. He pulled Leo close, his heart overflowing with a fierce, protective determination. "Yes, buddy. We are," Ethan said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "Someday, things will get better. I promise you that." Leo didn't ask how. He didn't ask when. He simply sighed contentedly and closed his eyes. Leo believed him. That was the magic of it. In a world full of broken promises and missed opportunities, Leo's faith in his father was absolute. And that belief was Ethan's single greatest treasure and his greatest burden. That burden was tied directly to a tragedy that had happened years ago. Ethan hadn't always been alone. He and his wife, Chloe, had been high school sweethearts, partners in every sense of the word, even in that wild, beautiful dream of becoming professional dancers. They were supposed to open their own studio. Then, one rainy night, just before Leo's first birthday, a reckless driver had stolen Chloe from him. The loss hadn't just broken his heart, it had shattered his future. The dance studio plan, the dreams of gliding across stages, all of it crumbled under the weight of grief, single parenthood, and sudden, insurmountable debt. Ethan hadn't just buried his dream, he had buried the woman who had shared it. He had been left heartbroken, but fiercely determined to raise his boy in a world bathed in love, even if that love had to come with the smell of floor wax. He chose to live not in his memory of grief, but in his promise to his son. As he sat there, watching Leo's steady breathing, Ethan felt the familiar sting of loss. He knew he wasn't doing what he loved, but he was doing what he had to do, every aching muscle a testament to his sacrifice. He wondered, sometimes, if Chloe would be proud of the man who traded his dancing shoes for a mop. He finally stood, leaning in to give Leo one last soft kiss on the forehead. The moment was perfect, simple, raw, and full of honest love. As he quietly closed the door, Ethan's mind drifted back to the academy. He briefly recalled the girl, Lila, in her wheelchair, watching the dancers. He remembered the simple, heavy truth he had spoken to her through the glass. Music doesn't ask you to stand. It just asks you to listen. He thought of the small flicker of a smile he had earned when he moved his feet to the soft jazz tune. It was a good memory, a small blip of kindness in a long, hard night. He didn't realize the ripple effect of that brief, gentle exchange. He had no idea that back at her massive, silent house, Lila was sitting in her elegant, soundproof room, her headphones on, not listening to the tutors or the therapists, but simply listening to the music he had played. Ethan, the tired cleaner, believed he was only fighting for his own son. He didn't realize that his compassionate work had already begun to light a new path for another lost soul. The love and humanity he carried inside him were too big to be contained by his own small apartment. They had spilled out, touched a broken heart, and given a little girl permission to find joy again. He locked the front door, turned off the lights, and sank onto his threadbare sofa, exhausted but fulfilled. His promise to Leo was real. And in making sure his son had everything he needed, even if it was just a father's comforting presence, Ethan was unknowingly setting the stage for a change much bigger than his own life. Upstairs, far above the polished floors where Ethan pushed his mop, was a different kind of life. This was the territory of Amelia, the successful businesswoman and, more importantly, Lila's mother. Her office wasn't in the academy itself, but in the adjacent financial building she owned, connected by a private, enclosed bridge, a symbol of her separation from the messy, everyday world. The office was all glass and steel, with a panoramic view of the sprawling city. It felt more like a clean, silent launchpad than a place to work. Amelia sat at a desk so vast and uncluttered it looked ready for a magazine shoot. Tonight, she wasn't focusing on stocks or real estate. She was focused on a large, high-definition monitor displaying a live feed of the Crescent Arts Academy's hallway. Amelia didn't watch the footage to monitor the security of the building. She watched it to monitor Lila. She wanted to know who her daughter was talking to, how she was spending her time, and most importantly, if she was safe. Control was Amelia's drug, the only thing that made her feel capable after the accident that had shattered her daughter's mobility and her own sense of security. Amelia was stunningly put together, even at this late hour. A sharp black blazer, diamond stud earrings that caught the harsh office light, and a severe focus in her deep-set eyes. She was a woman who could close a multimillion-dollar deal with a single, calm sentence, but she was utterly lost when faced with her daughter's quiet, lingering sadness. She had provided the best of everything, the best doctors, the best wheelchair, the best education. But those things couldn't mend a broken heart or rekindle a lost dream. Amelia knew, deep down in the lonely silence of her success, that she was failing. She kept throwing resources at the problem, hoping one of them would stick, masking her inability to just sit and grieve with Lila. Amelia fast-forwarded the recording from the night before, moving through the empty halls until she saw a flash of blue, Lila's winter coat. Then, the tired figure of the cleaner, Ethan, rolling his rickety trolley. Amelia's immediate reaction was one of annoyance. Security should ensure employees don't linger near the patrons, she thought, already mentally drafting a memo about stricter late-night cleaning protocols. She watched as the man, Ethan, approached the window. She saw him crouch down. She saw him speak. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to zoom in, ready to press the intercom and summon the night supervisor. But then, she saw Ethan's face. On the crisp, silent footage, she couldn't hear his words, but the sheer sincerity of his expression was impossible to miss. There was no pity in his eyes, no strained politeness that rich people offered to the less fortunate. There was just pure, uncomplicated kindness. He spoke to Lila like she was completely whole, entirely regular, and utterly important. Amelia watched the small, private dance. She saw Ethan pull out his phone, set down his mop, his waltz partner, as the camera's perspective showed it, and begin to move. It wasn't professional. It was clumsy in the way a tired man trying to be cheerful is clumsy, but it was brimming with soul. And then she watched Lila. The girl who normally held her body rigid and her gaze averted was suddenly alert. Her face, often masked by a polite, weary flatness, burst into a genuine, unguarded smile. Amelia watched as Lila swayed her own shoulders, participating in the secret performance from the other side of the glass. The sight was a gut punch. For the first time in years, Amelia saw a genuine, non-forced emotion on her daughter's face that wasn't sadness. And it wasn't due to the expensive therapist, or the latest educational game, or the diamond necklace Amelia had bought her last month. It was due to a cleaner. A working-class man who had nothing but his time and his simple, selfless compassion. Amelia felt a strange, prickly sensation behind her eyes, a feeling she hadn't had since the funeral. It was hope, fragile and terrifying, daring to flicker in the clinical silence of her office. She realized something staggering. Ethan didn't know who Lila was. He didn't know her mother was a millionaire. He didn't know she was the CEO's daughter, which meant his kindness wasn't performative. It was real. Her corporate instincts screamed at her. Intervene. Maintain control. Fire the man for distracting your daughter. But her long-neglected mother's heart whispered something else entirely. Amelia leaned back in her chair, finally taking her fingers away from the security controls. She saw the truth reflected in the monitor. Her own management style had suffocated Lila's spirit. Amelia had been trying to fix the result of the pain, while Ethan was simply treating the pain itself. She made a difficult, profound decision. She would not intervene. She would not send a memo. She would not fire the cleaner. She chose to observe quietly. Perhaps this man's kindness can reach her daughter in a way she no longer can, she admitted to herself. The realization was both humbling and heartbreaking. It was an admission of defeat in her role as the fixer, but a huge, positive step in her role as a mother. She was relinquishing the control that had been her shield, trusting a tired, kind stranger with the one thing she held most precious, her daughter's fragile soul. Amelia continued to watch the silent loop of the security footage, Ethan dancing with his mop, Lila smiling for the first time in months. The cold glass and steel of the office suddenly felt less important. A flicker of warmth had entered her controlled world, originating from the most unexpected place. The kindness of a low-paid worker who only wanted to share a little music. For Amelia, the closed curtain of Lila's life had been pulled back not by power or wealth, but by the smallest, most human act imaginable. The Crescent Arts Academy floor wasn't just clean. It felt charged with a quiet energy. Lila was back in her spot by the window, but today, things were different. She wasn't watching the empty space with longing. She was waiting with a nervous kind of hope. The cleaner, Ethan, had given her a key last time. A simple truth that echoed in her mind. Music doesn't ask you to stand. It just asks you to listen. Lila took that advice and started to listen differently. She closed her eyes during the dancer's brief break, and when the music softly returned, a classical piece today, she started to move. Just her arms, at first. They felt awkward and heavy, like they didn't quite belong to the song. They were the only part of her body she could command fully, but they weren't used to telling the story that her legs had always been meant to tell. Then, the cleaning trolley arrived. Ethan saw her right away, her eyes closed, her fingers tracing shapes in the air, her face concentrated in an effort to synchronize her spirit with the melody. He parked his trolley and quietly walked over to the glass, pausing his own humming. He waited until the song finished before he spoke. "That was good," he said gently. A little hesitant, maybe, but good. Lila blushed, embarrassed to have been caught. "It's hard. I don't know the steps." Ethan leaned in close, his voice warm. "Dance isn't steps, Lila. Steps are just the alphabet. Dance is emotion." He demonstrated, holding his hands out in front of him. "If the music makes you feel sad, Your arms should feel heavy, pulling down, right? He let his arms drop slowly. If the music makes you feel like you could fly, your arms should reach high, full of light. He lifted his arms gracefully, the rough skin on his hands contrasting with the delicate movement. He then tapped his chest, right over his heart. The rhythm doesn't start in the count of 8, Lila. It starts right here, in your heartbeat. This was the lesson that unlocked something deep inside her. Ethan taught her that her body was a canvas, and her hands were the brushes. He put on a piece of music, a vibrant, syncopated jazz number that made you want to snap your fingers. Show me how that rhythm makes your heart feel, Lila, he challenged her. Forget the floor. You're the conductor. Lila hesitated for only a second. Then, she took a deep breath. She started small, her shoulders rolling to the beat. Then her arms began to move. They weren't graceful yet, but they were free. She sliced the air with sharp movements, mimicking the brass section. She let her hands float and drift, mirroring the soft improvisation of the saxophone. She was telling a story of confinement and release, not with her feet, but with the joyful, unburdened motion of her upper body. And she was beginning to find the joy again. Meanwhile, high above, in a donor observation room tucked discreetly behind a mirrored panel, Amelia was watching. She had used her corporate pull to gain access to this hidden spot. She sat in the dark, feeling like a spy in her daughter's life, yet unable to look away. Amelia's professional attire, the crisp silk blouse, the tailored trousers, felt like a costume now. She was supposed to be a success, a leader, but here, she was just a nervous mother, praying a kind stranger wouldn't break her daughter's heart further. She watched Ethan and Lila. The man, Ethan, was completely engaged. He wasn't focused on the luxury of the building or his job duties. He was focused entirely on teaching Lila to connect with herself. He clapped for her sharp movements and nodded encouragingly when she missed a beat. He was patient and real. Amelia felt the control she prized so highly slipping away, replaced by raw, painful vulnerability. She saw that everything she had tried to buy for Lila, the tutors, the therapies, the expensive toys, was utterly worthless compared to this simple, heartfelt instruction. This was healing. This was real. She watched as Ethan gently corrected Lila's wrist position, showing her how to hold her hand as if presenting a gift to the audience. He used his own body to model the fluidity, the rough, hard-working man transforming into a teacher of grace. Then came the moment that shattered Amelia's composure. Lila was trying to capture a complex, playful rhythm with a rapid movement of her wrists. She got tangled up, her hands fluttering in the air, and she missed the beat entirely. Instead of sinking into despair, however, Lila stopped, looked at Ethan through the glass, and let out a sound Amelia hadn't heard in years. It was a full, unrestrained laugh. It wasn't a forced giggle or a polite titter. It was a loud, joyful sound that echoed faintly even through the thick, soundproofing glass. It was the sound of her spirit shaking off the dust of grief and disappointment. The sound of that laugh hit Amelia like a physical blow. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stop herself from crying out. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, spilled down her cheeks, ruining the perfect, professional makeup she wore like armor. She didn't bother to wipe the first few away. She just stared at the monitor, her body shaking with a mix of sorrow for the time lost and overwhelming relief for the joy found. The tough, unyielding businesswoman was gone, replaced by a mother whose heart was finally breaking open. She slowly reached up and wiped a tear from her cheek, a small, silent, but profound confession of her own emotional failure and the victory of this simple, kind man. For the first time, she truly understood that love sometimes meant letting go of control and trusting a stranger's genuine heart. Lila was dancing, truly dancing, for the first time in years, and all it took was a cleaner's song and a lesson about the human heartbeat. The next night, Ethan walked into the Crescent Arts Academy feeling the usual drag of a tired body and the weight of a heavy heart. He was already thinking about the floors he had to scrub and the bills he had to pay. He went straight to the staff locker room, a small, windowless space tucked away near the utility closets. His locker was dented, painted a drab gray, and rarely held anything more exciting than a clean t-shirt and a stale sandwich. He twisted the combination lock, his fingers stiff from the cold night air, and pulled the door open. That's when he saw it. Resting right in the center of his worn locker was a thick, pale envelope. It was heavy and felt expensive, nothing like the flimsy paper the Academy usually used for memos. Ethan frowned, immediately suspicious. His life was not one that contained pleasant surprises. Usually, an unexpected envelope meant a warning, a change in schedule, or maybe even a disciplinary note. He pulled the envelope out, his heart giving a nervous thud. It wasn't addressed to him, but the flap was tucked shut. He carefully opened it. Inside, there was a stack of crisp, new banknotes, a significant amount of money, far more than he earned in a couple of weeks. His breath hitched. He felt his hands start to tremble. He quickly checked his surroundings, worried someone had made a mistake or, worse, that this was some kind of test. Tucked around the money was a small, white piece of cardstock. He held it up to the harsh fluorescent light and read the handwritten, simple script. The note said, "For those who clean not just floors, but souls." Ethan stared at the words, utterly stunned. The money was a lot, but the note, that simple, powerful sentence, was a complete mystery. He sank onto the bench, the reality of the gift slowly starting to register. A raise. A silent, unexpected bonus. He immediately assumed it was the Academy management. Maybe someone had finally seen the hours he put in, the way he doubled back to ensure the main studio was spotless, the quiet dedication he maintained even when every muscle screamed in protest. It was an impersonal, corporate way of saying, "We noticed." He didn't realize that the eyes that had seen him were not the cold eyes of management, but the warm, tearful eyes of a mother. She had placed the envelope there herself, sneaking in before Ethan arrived, her heart hammering as she made the simple exchange. She couldn't bring herself to face him yet. Her pride was still too strong, her failure as a mother too raw. But after watching her daughter laugh, Amelia knew she had to repay the cleaner's kindness with the only thing she truly had in abundance: security and freedom. It was her attempt to give him hope, just as he had given hope to Lila. For Ethan, it was a moment of absolute triumph. He sat there, running his thumb over the unexpected cash. It wasn't about getting rich, it was about relief. This wasn't money for a sports car. This was money for rent, money for the overdue electric bill, money that meant he could stop worrying about which meal he had to skip this week. This was the universe, or maybe just the Academy management, telling him that his sacrifice was seen. His first thought wasn't for himself. It went straight to Leo. The promise he had made his son, "Someday, things will get better," felt closer now. The weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter, not because the job was easier, but because his load was shared, even if it was shared by an unknown, benevolent source. Ethan folded the money carefully and put it safely into his wallet. He wouldn't spend it all on bills, though. He had to use this unseen gift to spread the kindness he had just received. The next day, after his shift, Ethan walked into a small electronics store. He didn't buy a fancy phone or a new TV. He bought a beautiful, small portable speaker. It was a good one, with crystal clear sound and a decent bass line. It was small enough to sit on the window ledge near Lila, strong enough to fill the hallway with music they could both hear perfectly, without relying on his tinny phone speaker. This gift wasn't for him. It was to enhance Lila's lessons and continue the work of repairing her soul. Then, he went to a discount shoe store. He wasn't looking for dancing shoes. He was looking for everyday, tough, reliable shoes for Leo. His son's current pair had a hole in the sole that Ethan patched weekly. He picked out a pair of bright blue runners with decent traction and a brand new smell. The moment he paid, Ethan felt a pure, clean burst of fatherly joy. When he got home, Leo was still awake, drawing at the kitchen table. "Look, buddy," Ethan said, pulling the bag out. Leo's eyes went wide, not just at the sight of the shoes, but at the newness of them. He immediately slipped them on, stomping around the apartment as if he'd just received a pair of rocket boosters. "They are fast, Dad. They are so fast." Leo shouted, his face radiating utter delight. Ethan knelt down, tying the laces that were still too long for Leo to manage. He felt a lump in his throat. This was what the money was for. This simple, perfect moment where a promise was kept. The little things meant the world to him. They weren't little at all. They were everything. That night, when he returned to work, he approached the window where Lila was waiting. He held up the small, sleek speaker, a silent question in his eyes. Lila's jaw dropped. She knew instantly what it meant. More music. Better lessons. Ethan plugged the speaker in, placed it on the ledge, and pressed play on a lively salsa track. The music was clearer, fuller, and vibrant. It didn't just play, it vibrated through the glass, making the whole world feel alive. Lila immediately started moving her arms with renewed confidence, her shoulders swaying to the powerful Latin rhythm. Ethan watched her, his heart swelling with a quiet sense of purpose. He felt rich, not because of the money in his wallet, but because he was capable of bringing such profound, simple happiness to two lost souls, his son and the girl at the window. He didn't know where the gift came from, but he knew exactly what he was supposed to do with it. Keep dancing, keep caring, and keep the hope alive. In a corner of his small living room, sitting at the kitchen table with his trusty new sneakers planted firmly on the floor, was Leo. Across town, in a spacious, quiet study designed for maximum concentration, was Lila, seated in front of a giant monitor. They were both logging into the same place, a special online school art program that connected kids from different backgrounds for creative projects. They met in the chat room, a neutral ground where their families' social differences simply didn't exist. Leo used the screen name Little Lion, and Lila chose Star Dancer. At first, they talked about the art project, drawing a family portrait. But soon, the conversation drifted into the things that really mattered. They talked about family, courage, and dreams. Leo described his dad, Ethan, with the kind of fierce pride only a 6-year-old can muster. "My dad is a superhero," Leo typed, tapping the keys with blunt fingers. "He works all night so I can have new shoes. He sings the best lullabies." Leo described his dad's hard work and the long hours, framing it as a great adventure. He never mentioned cleaner. He just talked about his dad making things shine. Lila, who was used to stiff, formal conversations, found herself typing back with honesty she never used with adults. She described her big, quiet house and how sometimes she felt like a princess in a tower. She shared her biggest secret. Her legs didn't move anymore. She talked about the pain of watching the dancers, but also about a kind man who had shown her that her arms could still fly. "He says the music starts in your heart," Lila typed. "Wow," Leo replied. "My dad says the same thing about being brave. He says bravery starts with your heart." Their messages were full of honesty and laughter. It was a friendship built on shared vulnerability and dreams, and the beautiful, stunning irony was that they were sharing stories of the exact same man, Ethan. Meanwhile, at the academy, the bond between Ethan and Lila was strengthening every night. Their meeting had become a quiet, accepted ritual. Lila, sitting patiently by the glass, now had the crisp, clear sound of the portable speaker filling her space. Ethan called their time movement therapy, though neither of them had any medical training. Their sessions were simple, focused not on healing Lila's legs, but on healing her relationship with her body. He would guide her through simple exercises using hand signals through the glass, encouraging her to close her eyes and let the music dictate the movement. One night, he taught her about the difference between moving to the beat and moving to the melody. "The beat is your skeleton," Ethan explained, demonstrating with a steady clap. "Strong, constant. That's your will. But the melody," he moved his arms in a slow, flowing wave, "that's your spirit. It's the part that tells the story." Lila, or Star Dancer, absorbed it all. She focused on the feeling of her chest expanding when she breathed in time with a slow part of the song, learning to connect her breath to the rhythm. She found that the more honestly she moved her arms, the sharper for anger, the softer for peace, the more the sadness seemed to melt away. He wasn't just teaching her to dance. He was teaching her to feel again, to trust her own emotional expression. He saw her as a powerful, beautiful spirit trapped by circumstance, not a broken child. And because he saw her that way, she slowly began to see herself that way, too. The unseen mother, Amelia, still watched from the private observation room. She had seen Ethan give Lila the portable speaker, and the sight of her daughter's face lighting up with such pure gratitude had been another tearful confirmation that she had made the right, terrifying decision to let go. Amelia watched them interact, absorbing Ethan's gentle patience. She never would have believed a low-paid worker could possess such profound emotional wealth. Her millionaire's world felt hollow next to his quiet sincerity. The two worlds kept orbiting each other, so close, yet still invisible to the key players. Lila messaged Little Lion, Leo, about the amazing new speaker her kind friend at the academy had brought. How the music was so loud and clear now, and how she was learning to dance with her hands. Leo messaged star dancer, Lila, about his new, lightning-fast shoes his superdad had bought him with some extra money, and how his dad was working so hard to make things better. The threads were all there. The kind friend and the superdad were the same man. The extra money Leo mentioned was the anonymous gift Amelia had left in the locker. The laughter and honesty flowing between the two children were the direct results of a connection Ethan had forged with Lila, and the safety net Amelia had offered Ethan. They were all connected by a web of unspoken love and anonymous kindness. The two children, talking about family and courage, were unknowingly validating the sacrifices of their respective single parents. Lila was telling Leo how much his father's compassion meant to her, and Leo was telling Lila how much his father's determined love meant to him. It was a beautiful, tender bond, built entirely on truth, with the vast differences in their family's wealth and status completely invisible behind the anonymity of a screen. The children were living proof that kindness and love transcended status, and that a pure heart, whether it belonged to a cleaner or a powerful executive, was the true foundation of happiness. Amelia's life was a blur of high-stakes pressure, expensive suits, and constant deadlines. She juggled meetings across 3 different time zones before noon, handled aggressive clients, and managed properties worth millions. Her mind was a high-powered engine, always running, always demanding more. This wasn't a life, it was a performance. She carried the burden of all that responsibility like a tailored, custom-made coat, heavy, suffocating, but necessary. There was no room for error, and certainly no room for feelings. She had learned long ago that in her world, emotion was a liability. The accident had only reinforced this. When life broke, you didn't cry. You found the best lawyer and the best doctor. But lately, there was a crack in the armor, a distraction that wasn't a quarterly report or a difficult negotiation. It was the memory of a cleaner and the sound of her daughter's laughter. Amelia's routine often took her past the Crescent Arts Academy, sometimes late at night, sometimes just as Ethan was starting his shift. She found herself slowing down, not physically stopping, but letting her expensive car idle just long enough to glance toward the studio window. And there was Lila. The sight of her daughter moving her arms with joyful abandon was a sight Amelia never thought she would see again. Lila wasn't just doing therapy anymore. She was dancing. She would see Ethan on the other side of the glass, a tired man in faded clothes, moving his hands in slow, patient gestures, teaching Lila how to connect her spirit to the music pouring from the small, portable speaker Amelia had unknowingly paid for. It was always Ethan's patience that struck her the hardest. He never looked annoyed. He never looked like he had somewhere else he'd rather be. He treated their quiet sessions like the most important meeting of his day. In Amelia's world, time was money, and if someone was patient, it meant they were probably losing. Ethan wasn't losing anything. He was giving something priceless. His simple goodness began to touch something deep inside her. Before she became the powerhouse executive, Amelia had been a different person. She remembered a time when she found happiness in small things. A picnic blanket, a shared joke, the simple warmth of a sunrise. But that person had been buried under mortgages, stocks, and the trauma of the accident. Ethan's sincerity, his pure, unconditional, unpaid care, was a startling reminder of the simple goodness she'd long forgotten. She saw how much better he was at being a human being than she was. While she threw money and logistics at Lila's condition, Ethan offered his soul, and that was the cure. It was a humbling, humiliating realization for a woman who prided herself on being able to buy anything. She wrestled with the feeling. It's just gratitude, she told herself firmly during a video conference, the words gratitude and market correction sounding equally cold in her head. I am grateful he is helping Lila. That is all it is. I paid him. That was a bonus. A thank you. But the feeling wasn't neat and contained like gratitude. Gratitude was a polite, formal feeling, like a thank you note. This feeling was messy. It was a yearning to stop the car, to walk across the polished floor, to thank him properly, maybe even to talk to him about something that had nothing to do with her portfolio. It was a terrifying urge to be vulnerable. She thought about the note she'd left, for those who clean not just floors, but souls. Even in that anonymous gesture, she had tried to maintain control, hiding behind her wealth and her distance. Yet, the man had simply absorbed the cash and immediately funneled it back into his kindness. New shoes for his son, a speaker for Lila. He hadn't bought himself a single thing. The depth of his selflessness felt like a reproach, a mirror showing Amelia just how much of her own soul had been sanitized and neglected in the pursuit of success. She hadn't just forgotten simple goodness. She had completely forgotten how to be selfless. The truth, the one that kept Amelia awake at night, was harder to admit. His sincerity has begun to move her. It wasn't a crush. Not yet. It was a moral earthquake. Ethan wasn't just a cleaner. He was a silent, unintentional teacher showing her that the real value in life wasn't measured by her balance sheet, but by the quiet, daily acts of giving. He was moving her from a life defined by cold logic to a life that might contain warmth and messy, necessary feeling. She was being shifted out of her emotional rut by the simple rhythm of a cleaner's kindness. Amelia looked out at the lights of the city, a vast, glittering empire she commanded. But all she felt was the softening in her chest, a new, tender spot that was both painful and wonderfully alive. She had spent years trying to be unbreakable, but now, watching her daughter find joy through a simple act of compassion, Amelia finally realized that being moved was the first step toward being whole again. The music was a slow, melancholic blues track, perfect for the late hour. Lila was moving her arms with the grace of a young willow tree, swaying gently to the rhythm Ethan had chosen. Their sessions had grown from simple movements to deep conversations held through the glass, their voices muffled but their hearts perfectly clear. Lila was smart, and she was an empath. She had learned how to read the exhaustion in Ethan's shoulders, the way his eyes sometimes drifted away, looking at something in the past. Tonight, she decided to ask the question that had been pressing on her heart. You told me once you wanted to be a famous dancer. Lila typed quickly on her small whiteboard, holding it up to the glass for him to read. Why did you stop? Why did life happen? Ethan read the words and felt a warmth spread through his chest. No one, not even his best friend, had asked him that question with such simple, direct honesty in years. He felt the protective shell he usually wore begin to crack. He knew he could trust Lila. She saw the man, not the mess. He took a deep breath, and for the next few minutes, he told her the story. He spoke about Chloe, his wife. He used simple words to describe their big, shared dream, not just of dancing, but of building a life together, a life that moved to music. He described how the car accident had been fast, cruel, and completely unexpected, leaving him with only his son, Leo, and a mountain of silence and bills. I had to trade my dancing shoes for work boots, Ethan said, tapping his worn work shoe. Someone had to stay grounded for Leo. The cleaning job was steady. It paid the rent. You can't raise a boy on a dream. Lila listened intently, her face serious. She understood tragedy. She understood the sudden, brutal halt of a beautiful life. But as Ethan spoke, she realized something powerful. He carried all that immense pain, all that loss, but he carried never bitterness. He spoke of his wife with love and of his sacrifice with quiet pride. He was sad, yes, but he wasn't angry at the world. He was a survivor who had chosen kindness over resentment. Lila wrote something else on her board. This time, her writing was bigger, bolder. Show me one of your old routines. Ethan laughed, a short, weary sound. Oh, Lila. These old bones don't do routines anymore. I'd fall over. No, you won't, she insisted, tapping the glass urgently. You told me dance is emotion. I want to see your story. I want to see the dancer who is still in there. The sincerity in her eyes was impossible to deny. She wasn't asking the cleaner to perform. She was asking the artist to reveal himself. She wanted to bear witness to his beautiful, buried self. He gave in. Okay, he said softly. Just a small one. For my favorite student. He chose a piece of music he and Chloe used to practice to. A jazzy, powerful arrangement that started with a sudden swell of strings and then dropped into a complicated rhythm. He placed his new portable speaker in the center of the polished floor, stood in the pool of white light, and closed his eyes. For a moment, he was no longer Ethan the tired cleaner. He was Ethan, the man who had loved, dreamed, and danced. He began to move. His first few steps were stiff, his muscles protesting the sudden demand for grace. He stumbled slightly on a pivot he used to nail effortlessly. But then, the music took over. He let his body remember the old language. His movements told a story. They were heavy at first, a slumped shoulder and a dragging step representing the crushing weight of the accident and the grief. Then came a determined, slow turn, showing the moment he decided to live for Leo. His arms reached high, strong and desperate, in a gesture of loss, before slowly lowering and resting over his heart, showing the deep, abiding love that kept him tethered to the world. He didn't leap or twirl high. He used the space close to the ground, his feet working the rhythm in intricate, precise steps that only a true dancer would attempt. There was a raw, aching beauty in his struggle, a perfect choreography of sorrow and unshakable hope. The routine was short, maybe 60 seconds. When the music ended, Ethan was breathless, sweat beading on his forehead, his body visibly aching. He looked exactly like what he was. A middle-aged man who had just run a marathon on pure memory. He opened his eyes, feeling vulnerable and exposed. He looked at Lila, expecting pity, or maybe just quiet confusion. Instead, Lila was clapping. Hard. Her eyes were shining, her mouth was stretched into a beautiful, huge smile, and tears were rolling down her cheeks, not of sadness, but of utter, unrestrained joy. She clapped until her hands must have hurt, her whole being focused entirely on the man standing across the room. She picked up her whiteboard, but she didn't write anything. She used the marker to draw a simple picture. A strong, stick-figure man dancing, with a huge, undeniable heart drawn clearly on his chest. Lila clapped joyfully. She saw not a janitor, but an artist. In that small, brightly lit studio, Ethan's past was finally validated. He realized that the dream hadn't been buried. It had simply been given a new, more profound purpose. The recognition in Lila's eyes meant more than any standing ovation from an audience of thousands. His sacrifice was beautiful, his pain was shared, and his soul was clean. The forgotten dream had been seen, and in seeing it, Lila had healed him a little, too. Word travels fast in any workplace, but here, where emotions were already heightened by the drama of dance, the rumors about the cleaner and the young girl were spreading like wildfire. The staff had split into two camps. Some of the high-strung, professional dancers and administrative people gossiped cruelly. Can you believe the nerve? The help teaching the owner's daughter. He should be fired. They saw Ethan's kindness as unprofessional overreach. They saw the vast distance between their paychecks and Amelia's wealth, and they saw Ethan as stepping out of line. But others, the humble security guards, the catering staff, and a few younger teachers, looked at Ethan with quiet admiration for his courage. They had seen Lila's transformation. They understood that the simple man with the mop was delivering something money couldn't buy. Ethan felt the tension, the cutting glances and the silent nods, but he didn't slow down. He had a promise to keep, both to Leo and now, secretly, to Lila's spirit. He was polishing the main hallway when a figure approached him, stepping out of the shadows cast by the large marble columns. She was perfectly dressed, utterly composed, and commanded the air around her like a ship commands the sea. It was Amelia. She didn't usually walk the halls late at night. She was a CEO, not a supervisor. Ethan stopped pushing his mop, the only sound the faint, dying whine of the motor. He straightened up, instantly aware of the worn state of his clothes and the smell of industrial soap clinging to him. This was the moment. The cleaner and the millionaire. The artist and the executive. Amelia approached him with slow, deliberate steps, her expression professional, betraying none of the internal turmoil she'd experienced watching him from her hidden room. She stopped a polite distance away and extended a hand, the gesture formal, almost chilly. "Mr. Jones?" she asked, using his surname, though they had never formally met. Ethan shook her hand, a brief, firm grip. "Yes, Ethan." Amelia didn't waste time. She bypassed the truth entirely, defaulting to the safety of her corporate identity. "I am Amelia. I am the owner of the Crescent Arts Academy." Ethan's eyes widened momentarily. He had assumed she was a powerful figure, but hearing her confirm her role, the owner of the entire, sprawling operation, was still a shock. He processed the information quickly, realizing that the rumors had reached the top, and this was likely his final notice. Amelia started with the business language. "I've been made aware of your interactions with one of our young patrons. While I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Jones, this is a professional institution, and we need to maintain certain boundaries. I must ask you about your intentions." She was waiting for him to justify himself, to apologize, or maybe even to ask for more money. She was waiting for him to play the role of the desperate employee. But Ethan didn't. He looked past her expensive suit and her flawless makeup, and spoke with the same quiet sincerity he used with Lila. He didn't mention his paycheck or his need for the job. He simply spoke about the girl he saw every night. "My intention," Ethan said, his voice low and steady, "is that every person deserves to feel music in their heart. When I first saw Lila, she was just watching. She was full of longing, like a light that had been put out." He ignored the fact that Amelia hadn't mentioned her daughter by name. He only spoke of the girl's soul. "I didn't try to fix her legs," he continued, looking Amelia straight in the eye. "I just taught her how to use her arms to tell her story. I taught her that the rhythm starts in her heart." He stepped closer, his sincerity overpowering the physical distance of the large hall. "Lila is not a broken student. She is an artist. She has courage in her little body than most of the people who walk these floors. Her potential, her spirit, is enormous. It just needed someone to see it." He spoke of Lila's potential with a conviction that was completely free of agenda. It was a father talking about another child. Amelia stood rigid, her CEO mask firmly in place, but inside, a massive wall was crumbling. Ethan's words, so focused and pure, went right past her defenses. They didn't talk about employee policy. They talked about courage and spirit. She had spent a year listening to doctors and therapists talk about Lila's condition. Ethan was talking about Lila's soul. The composure that Amelia had perfected over decades of boardroom battles suddenly cracked. Her eyes, usually hard and clear, grew bright. Her lip trembled just slightly. She realized that in all her grief, in all her striving for success and stability, she had lost sight of the beautiful, courageous spirit Ethan was describing. Ethan's honest, simple praise was the greatest validation she had ever received, far beyond any award or profitable deal. For the first time in years, someone spoke to her as a mother, not a CEO. She didn't fire him. She didn't offer him more money. She simply dropped her gaze, unable to meet the honest depth of his eyes, and whispered the only word that truly mattered. "Thank you." The tension broke, replaced by a profound, shared silence. Amelia had come to test his heart. Instead, her own had been laid bare and found wanting. She was exposed, vulnerable, and completely seen, not as the millionaire owner, but as the mother of the courageous girl he was teaching. It was the most honest moment of her life. The gap between their two worlds, the cleaner and the CEO, suddenly closed, bridged by the shared love for one little girl. The late hour in Amelia's high-rise office was usually a time of cold, quiet control. She was catching up on archival property reports, the tedious but necessary work of a successful businesswoman. The city lights glittered outside her window, a silent testament to the wealth and power she commanded. Suddenly, A thick manila envelope was dropped onto her desk by a hurried courier. It contained old, forgotten documents, archived legal papers from the settlement of her husband's accident years ago, dredged up for an obscure corporate audit. Amelia sighed, annoyed by the interruption to her planned workflow. She opened the envelope, pulling out the thin, faded pages of a police report. The sterile, technical language immediately brought back a freezing wave of trauma. The date, the time, the details of the twisted metal. It was the day the world had broken. The day the car crash had taken her husband and stolen Lila's mobility. Her fingers, usually steady enough to sign multimillion-dollar contracts, started to tremble. She scanned the report, her eyes skipping the details of the impact and focusing on the names. Her husband's name was there, listed as the victim. Lila was listed with her injuries. And then, she reached the section for the driver of the other vehicle, the person deemed responsible for the fatal collision. Amelia's world seemed to tilt. The cold, silent office dissolved into a blur of raw, screaming disbelief. The name, printed in stark black and white on the official report, was Chloe Jones. Chloe Jones, Ethan's late wife. The man who had brought laughter back into her daughter's silent life. The humble, kind cleaner whose sincere heart had cracked Amelia's protective armor, was tied by a brutal, horrifying thread to the worst pain her family had ever known. Amelia slumped back in her chair, the paper fluttering from her numb fingers. The report lay on the floor, the truth exposed under the harsh office light. The world seemed to tilt. She felt a wave of immediate fury, hot, searing anger directed at the universe for this cruel twist of fate. His wife did this. His life caused this misery. All this time, the man who was healing my daughter was connected to the woman who destroyed her. The fury quickly mixed with deep, consuming sorrow. She saw the face of her late husband, whom she had grieved alone for years, and the broken, quiet child Lila had been until Ethan walked into their lives. The pain of the past, which had been neatly filed away into an emotional vault, exploded back to life. And then came the terrible confusion. How could this be? The two things could not exist in the same universe. The source of her greatest pain, the accident, could not be linked to the source of her greatest hope, the man teaching Lila to dance with her soul. She saw a flash of Ethan's face, the honest exhaustion, the patient smile, the simple dignity. She remembered the unseen gift he had received and immediately turned into a gift for Leo and Lila. She remembered him standing up to her as the CEO, speaking only of Lila's courage and potential. That sincerity, that undeniable, genuine goodness, had broken through her defenses. Was it all a lie? Was this some cruel, drawn-out punishment? Amelia pressed her palms hard against her temples, trying to force the rational, cold logic back into her brain. She could call her lawyers. She could fire Ethan and destroy his life. His wife was the culprit. The evidence was clear. She had the power to make him pay for the devastation his family had inflicted. The ghost of justice was screaming for revenge. But then, the quiet voice of her heart, the voice that Ethan's kindness had just awakened, countered the rage. It offered an impossible question. Does the man who saved Lila's spirit deserve to pay for the crime of a person who is already gone? She looked at her private security monitor, which showed the empty hall of the academy where Lila and Ethan shared their secret dance. The floor was clean, the speaker was gone, but the echo of Lila's laughter seemed to hang in the air. Amelia realized that her life had been defined by a single, terrible accident. The past was an immovable weight, but the man named Ethan had stepped into their world and brought them a future defined by hope and connection. The man who was tied to the source of the pain was now the architect of their healing. The storm of truth raged inside her, tearing between the instinct for fury and the quiet, persistent feeling of love. She didn't know what she would do, but in the center of her confusion, a single, unwavering thought emerged. She could not destroy the man who had brought life back to her child. The choice was agonizing, but the purity of Ethan's heart was the light in the overwhelming darkness. She was being asked to choose between a dead past and a living future. She was being tested. Amelia closed her eyes, clutching the police report, the paper crinkling in her trembling hand. The anger was still there, but beneath it, the tiny, resilient seedling of hope that Ethan had planted refused to die. She had to face him now, not as a boss or an owner, but as a woman forced to choose between vengeance and the future of her daughter's heart. For Amelia, the world hadn't settled back into its neat, organized lines. The police report, with the name Chloe Jones printed on it, was hidden away, but the truth it held was a monstrous shadow following her everywhere. She couldn't face Ethan. Every time she thought about walking past the studio, her stomach twisted with a mix of blinding fury and sickening guilt. The fury demanded justice for her dead husband. The guilt reminded her that the man she wanted to destroy was the one person who had saved her daughter's spirit. So, she retreated. Amelia started avoiding Ethan completely. She stopped looking at the security feed. She began taking a long, cold walk through the basement tunnels just to get from her office building to the academy entrance, rather than risking a glimpse of him near the main hall. Her silence was deafening, a wall she built to protect herself from the impossible choice she had to make. Lila, who had spent the last few weeks basking in the warmth of Ethan's attention and her mother's quiet approval, felt the shift instantly. Her mother's presence became like winter. Amelia wasn't shouting or angry. She was simply absent, cold, and quiet. She would look at Lila with strained eyes, quickly kissing her on the forehead before retreating to a video conference or a closed room. The joy Amelia had felt, the tears of relief, had been replaced by a tense, fragile sadness that hung in the air like a thick fog. Lila's newfound strength began to falter. The rhythms she was learning felt awkward again. She started wheeling herself to the window, not with excitement, but with a growing knot of anxiety. Ethan, meanwhile, felt the cold air too, but he didn't know the reason. He just knew the atmosphere at the academy had changed since his short, heartfelt conversation with the owner. The cruel rumors seemed louder now, and the respectful nods from the security staff seemed more like pity. When Lila started looking sad again, Ethan immediately blamed himself. Did I say too much about Chloe? He wondered. Did I make the owner angry by talking about Lila's potential? He felt the familiar dread of a single father trying not to lose the job that fed his son. He didn't know the truth, but his kindness made him assume he was the one who had made the mistake. He knew he should be careful. He knew he should step back to protect himself. So, he decided to keep his distance. One night, Ethan came in late. Instead of wheeling his trolley directly to the main studio, he veered left, heading toward the less-used side rehearsal rooms, planning to work there first and avoid the main window. It was the only way he knew how to cool the tense situation and protect Lila from further adult drama. But Lila saw him. She saw the quick, guilty look he gave the main studio. She saw him try to sneak away. The fear that she was losing the only person who truly saw her, the person who made her feel whole, was a terrifying push. She wheeled herself as fast as she could to the glass, her small body shaking with urgency. Ethan heard the small thump of her wheelchair hitting the window frame and stopped, reluctantly turning around. Lila didn't use the whiteboard. Her eyes, glistening with tears, were locked on his. She spoke softly, her voice muffled but painfully clear through the thick glass. "Please don't go," she whispered. "Don't go away from the window." Ethan felt his tired heart squeeze. He opened his mouth to explain, to say he had to clean the other rooms, to say he didn't want to cause trouble for her mother. But Lila didn't let him speak. Her next words were simple, honest, and shattered his self-doubt completely. "You're the only one who makes me feel like I can fly," she said. The words hung in the quiet hallway, cutting through the heavy air and Amelia's devastating secret. They were a life raft of pure, honest love in a sea of tragedy and confusion. Ethan stood frozen, looking at the tear tracks on her cheeks. He realized in that instant that his purpose here transcended the money, the job, and the strange, tense owner. It was about this little girl, who was choosing him, the cleaner, as her connection to freedom and joy. He took a slow, deep breath, letting the shame and confusion about Amelia fade away. He gently pushed his cleaning trolley aside and walked over to the window. He didn't dance. He simply smiled, the worn, genuine smile of shared hardship, and he put his hand up to the glass. Lila immediately mirrored the gesture, her small hand pressing against his. Her words had kept him there. They were more powerful than Amelia's million-dollar secrets, more important than his financial worries, and far stronger than the dead weight of the past. The air between him and Amelia still grew heavy, thick with the unspoken truth, but the connection between Ethan and Lila was stronger. They had chosen hope, and hope, rooted in the genuine heart, always finds a way to stand tall. The online chat window glowed late into the evening. Leo, Little Lion, and Lila, Star Dancer, were deep into a conversation about the nature of true bravery. Star Dancer, my friend at the academy says being brave is when you let your heart feel the rhythm, even if you can't move your feet. Little Lion, that's cool. My dad says being brave is making a promise and keeping it, no matter how hard you have to work. He's working 2 shifts so I can keep practicing my art. Their friendship had continued to bloom, built on this foundation of courage, hope, and the desire to start over. They decided that the best way to finally meet would be at the Crescent Arts Academy's upcoming public showcase, a busy, public event where neither would feel awkward about the introduction. Leo was excited. Ethan had polished his best clothes, and he wore his lightning-fast new shoes, shiny and bright. Ethan was working the event, ensuring the halls stayed spotless even as hundreds of people flowed through. He told Leo to stay near the quieter seating area after the initial show. The academy was transformed. It wasn't the silent, gleaming hall of the late shift. It was bustling, filled with the loud murmur of rich patrons, the scent of expensive perfume, and the sound of classical music drifting from the studios. Amelia was there, regal and tense in a stunning evening gown, maintaining her distance from everyone, including Ethan. The police report was tucked away, but the terrible secret pulsed like a wound beneath her composure. She watched Lila, who was perched in the aisle in her sophisticated wheelchair, looking slightly nervous but excited to be out in the crowd. Ethan, dressed in his clean uniform, pushed his trolley through the quieter sections of the hall. He kept his eyes lowered, aware of Amelia's presence and the cold tension that now lay between them. Then, in a quiet, calm seating area, the 2 children moved toward each other. Lila was waiting by the large window where she usually met Ethan. She was looking for a small boy. Leo, exploring his new surroundings, saw a girl in a lightweight, modern wheelchair. She was looking at him with curious eyes. They walked, or wheeled, forward tentatively. Little Lion? Lila asked, her voice quiet but certain. Star Dancer? Leo confirmed, his mouth widening into a huge grin. The joy was instant. They recognized each other immediately, not by their clothes or their circumstances, but by the shared light in their eyes. Then came the moment of truth. Leo, wanting to show off his superhero father, pointed across the hall. My dad is here. He brought me. See? The one with the big mop. That's my dad. Lila followed his pointing finger. She saw Ethan, the kind man who taught her the rhythm of her heartbeat, pushing his trolley, shining the floor. She smiled at the connection, then remembered who her own mother was. She looked around until she saw Amelia, who was watching the scene, her face a mask of silent agony. That's my mom, Lila whispered, pointing to the elegant woman in the powerful black dress. She owns this place. The children stood frozen, having just solved the mystery of their respective parents. They realized that their online honesty had revealed them to be the cleaner's son and the businesswoman's daughter. They were separated by the widest chasm of wealth, job, and now, the devastating secret of the past. Instead of shock or shame or awkward silence, they looked at each other and burst out laughing. It wasn't nervous laughter. It was pure, unadulterated, innocent joy. They laughed at the sheer absurdity of it, at the fun of the discovery, at the fact that they were friends despite all the barriers the grown-ups put in the world. Their connection was too real, too powerful to be undone by social class or status. The sound of their laughter, so loud and clear, sliced through the expensive atmosphere of the academy and hit Amelia with the force of an avalanche. She watched her daughter, the girl whose life she feared was irreparably damaged, laughing joyously with the son of the man she wanted to hate. She saw Leo, the proud son, showing off the new shoes his father had bought, standing proudly next to the daughter of the woman who could crush his family's livelihood. The purity of their connection was an undeniable force of nature. It spoke louder than any police report, any legal threat, or any boardroom defense. It was a beautiful, living repudiation of the dark past that Amelia was clinging to. Amelia's rigid posture finally broke. She didn't cry, but she reached up and touched her chest. She felt a profound, undeniable warmth spread from that spot, melting the ice around her heart. The children's light was shining directly on her pain, demanding that she choose love over vengeance, connection over isolation. She finally understood that Ethan's kindness was not a lie. It was a miraculous truth. The only way to keep the children's light shining was to embrace the Father who created it. The moment of reckoning was no longer avoidable. The children's laughter had been the catalyst, the spark that finally forced Amelia to choose light over darkness. She couldn't live with the silence and the secret any longer. She had to face the man whose heart held both the cause of her greatest pain and the cure for her deepest sorrow. That night, Amelia sent a simple text message to her night supervisor. "Ask Mr. Jones to meet me in my office after his shift. Private matter." Ethan arrived, nervous but composed. He was no longer just the cleaner. He was the man Lila had said made her fly. He stepped into Amelia's massive, silent office, a world away from the familiar grime of the utility room. Amelia was standing by the window, looking out at the glittering, uncaring city. She turned to face him, her expensive suit and severe hairstyle a stark contrast to the raw vulnerability in her eyes. The mask of the CEO was gone, replaced by the terrified face of a grieving mother. She didn't offer him a seat. She simply held out a single, thin sheet of faded paper. It wasn't the whole police report, just the final page, the one containing the stark, terrible name. "I know why," she said, her voice shaking despite her best effort to keep it steady. "I know why our lives are connected, Ethan. It's not just Lila and Leo." Ethan took the paper, his hands, which were used to the rough scrub of steel wool, suddenly clumsy with shock. He read the name of the driver of the other vehicle, the name of the woman who caused the crash that took Amelia's husband and broke Lila. The world stopped spinning. The air in the expensive office became thick and heavy, a terrible, shared silence. Ethan's eyes, usually so full of gentle warmth, widened into circles of crushing, heartbreaking guilt. He looked from the name to Amelia, a woman standing before him, holding the full weight of her past. He dropped the paper. He didn't have to ask questions. The brutal logic of the universe had connected the dots, leaving him exposed and devastated. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice trembling, cracking under the force of the unimaginable truth. "I swear, Amelia, I didn't know your husband was. I didn't know Lila was your daughter until a few weeks ago. I didn't know who you were." Amelia looked at him through tears that finally escaped the barricade she had held for years. She walked slowly toward him, closing the vast distance of their social separation, but keeping the emotional distance open for her final, excruciating confession. "I know," she said. "That's what makes it harder." She didn't mean his job. She meant his sincerity. His kindness was real. His lack of knowledge was the proof of his beautiful, honest heart. It wasn't an elaborate trick of revenge or a cruel coincidence. It was just a brutal accident, followed by a miracle of compassion. The silence that followed was the longest, most important silence either of them had ever known. It was the silence in which forgiveness slowly began to replace resentment. Amelia saw not the husband of the driver who ruined her life, but the father who sacrificed his dreams and loved a stranger's daughter back to life. Ethan saw not the cold, wealthy owner who could fire him, but the broken woman who had been clinging to a truth that could have destroyed him. Amelia reached out a hand, not to touch him, but to trace the empty air between them. "I watched you, Ethan. I saw your kindness. I saw Lila laugh. And when I read this report, I wanted to hate you. I wanted justice." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "But the hatred, it was empty. It was colder than my office. It couldn't stand up against the sound of her laughter." Ethan found his own voice, equally broken. "I spent years mourning Chloe, not knowing the full extent of the tragedy. All I've ever wanted to do is fix things, to be good, to make sure Leo knows love. I tried to do the same for Lila. In that moment, standing together amidst the ruins of their connected past, they had an awakening. They realized that the pain, the absolute devastation that had scarred their two families, had already built something beautiful and strong. Her movement, her laughter, her newfound joy, and the pure friendship that blossomed with Leo, these were the true, undeniable outcomes of their shared history. They had unknowingly been co-parenting hope, healing each other's children, and in the process, healing themselves. "We can't change the past," Ethan said, finding a quiet strength in his voice. "But we can choose what the future looks like for them. For us." Amelia nodded, her tears now flowing freely, not from sorrow, but from release. The businesswoman's burden of vengeance and control lifted completely. She saw the possibility of a future that honored the memory of the dead by celebrating the lives of the living. The final curtain had closed on the chapter of grief and secrets. The test of hearts was over. Amelia had chosen love. Ethan had chosen transparency. They stood together, two broken adults, realizing their pain was no longer a secret burden, but a shared foundation for a new, messy, and hopeful family. The cold office, filled with their shared tears and the promise of a future defined by Lila's courage and Leo's light, felt warmer than any home Amelia had ever owned. The Crescent Arts Academy's annual charity gala was a glittering display of the city's elite. For the first time, the atmosphere felt different to Amelia. The chandeliers still sparkled, and the gowns were still elegant, but the air was charged not with status, but with genuine expectation. Amelia stood in the wings, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. Their meeting in her office had been the explosion that cleared the air. Now, their relationship was raw, redefined by honesty and the shared, terrible memory. The past still existed, but it no longer dictated their present. They were united by their shared focus on Lila. Lila, radiant and fearless, was ready. She had insisted on performing the piece she and Ethan had secretly choreographed, a powerful fusion of their sessions, a dance titled The Courage of the Heart. Amelia, no longer controlled by fear, had agreed without hesitation. It was the final, public step in her journey of letting go. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience. Lila wheeled herself confidently onto the stage. The music began, a classical piano piece that abruptly shifted into a driving, percussive rhythm. The performance was breathtaking. It was a fusion of grace, wheelwork, and raw emotion. Lila used the wheelchair not as a limitation, but as an extension of her body. She executed sharp, powerful pivots and spins, the wheels becoming dancers themselves, tracing intricate patterns on the stage. Her arms, taught by Ethan to tell a story, soared and dipped. One moment, they were heavy with sorrow, remembering the accident. The next, they were reaching high, full of the fierce, determined hope of a child choosing to live freely. Ethan watched from the darkness backstage, his heart pounding in time with the music. He saw Chloe's dream, his own buried talent, and Lila's magnificent courage all come together in one glorious, unified motion. The audience, initially expecting a bittersweet display of perseverance, was captivated by her freedom, not her limitations. They didn't see the wheelchair. They saw a true artist commanding the stage, her spirit unchained. Leo, seated in the audience with a trusted guardian, stood up, ignoring the fancy clothes around him, and cheered his friend with unreserved passion. Lila finished the piece with a final, magnificent flourish, her arms outstretched, her head thrown back in a posture of complete, vulnerable triumph. The silence lasted for one profound, collective beat. Then, the applause came, a thunderous roar that shook the very foundations of the academy. It was a standing ovation that lasted for minutes, fueled by genuine awe and emotional release. Ethan, wiping tears from his eyes, felt a wave of humble pride wash over him. His dream wasn't dead. It had simply found a new, more profound meaning in his student. In the chaos of the celebration, a young woman in the audience, deeply moved, pulled out her phone and uploaded a quick, raw video of the final minute of the performance. She wrote a simple caption, based on the whispered rumors she'd heard all night, the cleaner who believed in her. The video spread worldwide with impossible speed. Within hours, the simple, powerful narrative captured the internet's heart. The story wasn't just about a girl dancing. It was about the power of unseen kindness, the dignity of hard work, and the truth that compassion knows no class. Ethan's name, the cleaner, became synonymous with hope and selfless belief. Amelia sat on a plush sofa, the sound of the applause still ringing in her ears, watching the views count climb on her phone. She watched the comments. The mother should thank that man. He's a hero. She's incredible. And he's an angel. She watched the video, her tears now a mixture of overwhelming pride for Lila and deep, humbling realization. She finally, completely understood how healing truly works. It wasn't found in a doctor's chart or a lawyer's settlement. It was found in the human connection that chooses love over revenge, vulnerability over control, and hope over grief. She looked across the room and saw Ethan, trying to melt into the wall, uncomfortable with the sudden spotlight. His eyes found hers, and in that gaze, all the secrets, all the pain, all the forgiveness of the last few weeks were silently exchanged. The memory of the police report was still there, but it was small, dusty, and meaningless compared to the light radiating from the stage. Amelia rose, walking past the glittering patrons with a quiet determination she hadn't known before. She reached Ethan, no longer the CEO confronting an employee, but a woman standing beside a man she loved and respected. "They're incredible," she whispered, her voice thick. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." He nodded, his humility unwavering. "We all just needed a rhythm to follow, Amelia. Lila found it for us." Amelia didn't go back to her high-rise office. She took Ethan and Leo home in her car. They stopped by the bakery, bought treats, and spent the rest of the night planning a future that would weave their two lives together. A future defined not by wealth or tragedy, but by the magnificent courage of their children. Ethan was no longer the cleaner. Amelia was no longer just the CEO. And Lila was no longer just a girl in a wheelchair. They were a family, forged in fire and polished by the purest, most selfless love. The evening air was crisp and cool as Amelia drove into Ethan's modest neighborhood. The transition from her sprawling estate to this quiet, simple street felt less like crossing a physical boundary and more like stepping into a different, warmer reality. The sleek luxury of her car felt conspicuous parked outside Ethan's small, neat home. This visit was the final, most necessary step in their journey of forgiveness and connection. Amelia wasn't here as a CEO or a patron. She was here as a mother, accepting a dinner invitation from a man who had changed her life. She carried a simple, small bouquet of flowers, not the elaborate, expensive arrangements she usually sent, but a humble bunch from a local grocery store. It felt honest. Ethan opened the door, dressed in a clean, simple shirt. His humility was still present, but now it was layered with a new, quiet dignity. His eyes, which had reflected exhaustion and sadness for so long, were now bright with nervous hope. Inside, the home was small, practical, and impeccably tidy. Leo was bouncing with excitement, unable to contain the joy of having his online friend, star dancer, right in his living room. Lila sat quietly in her wheelchair, a little overwhelmed by the closeness of the space and the immense emotional weight of the gathering. "Welcome," Ethan said simply, stepping aside to let Amelia enter. "Dinner's just pasta. Nothing fancy." "It's perfect," Amelia replied, her voice soft. The dinner was a flurry of simple, shared moments. Leo and Lila sat side by side, quickly reverting to their easy, playful chat, the pure light of their friendship immediately filling the room. They talked about art, about their plans to design a poster for the academy, and about the sheer hilarity of their parents finally meeting. Ethan, watching the children, served the pasta, and soon, the adults found their rhythm. They spoke of the future, of finding a way for Ethan to use his talent to teach, perhaps helping with Lila's movement therapy formally. They talked about finding a bigger place where the children could have more room to run, or wheel. They spoke, too, of the past, but the conversation was no longer weighted by accusation. It was simply two adults sharing a shared wound. Amelia realized that Ethan's grief over Chloe was just as profound as her own loss. There was no villain here, only survivors. They acknowledged the devastating power of the accident, but they chose, with every shared glance and gentle smile, to focus on the healing power of the present. For the first time in more than a decade, Amelia felt peace instead of pain. The polished, empty success of her mansion had never offered this feeling. This grounded, honest warmth of a simple kitchen table filled with simple food and complicated, yet resolved, hearts. She realized that her true home wasn't a building. It was this sense of belonging. As the evening wound down and Leo finally succumbed to sleep on the small sofa, Amelia and Ethan stood in the doorway, watching Lila and Leo exchange a final, sleepy farewell. "You know," Amelia said quietly, leaning against the doorframe, "I thought my life was defined by that tragedy. I built walls of money and work around it." Ethan nodded, his eyes kind. "And I thought mine was defined by hard labor and loss. But we were both wrong. Our lives were being defined by the choices we made after the tragedy." He didn't ask for a new job or a place to live. He just offered the simple truth of their journey. Amelia's heart, finally whole, responded not with a CEO's promise, but with a woman's acceptance. She saw not just her daughter's healer, but her own partner in a new life. Two families, once connected by tragedy, were now united by love, forgiveness, and the profound belief that kindness can heal even the deepest wounds. The accidental destruction of the past had paved the way for the intentional creation of a new, beautiful future, built on the solid, unshakable foundation of the children's light and the awakening of two hearts. Years later, Lila dances again, not perfectly, but beautifully. The music swells, her arms flowing with grace as Ethan watches from the wings, pride softening the lines of his face. Amelia stands beside him, their eyes meeting, no anger left, only quiet gratitude. From tragedy, they built something stronger than forgiveness. Love, in its purest, most human form. And as the final note fades, the camera pans over their joined hands, the cleaner, the mother, and the girl who danced again. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. Also, don't forget to like the video, subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next upcoming stories. Thank you for watching.